The rose-red city of Petra hides more than breathtaking facades. Behind those carved cliffs lies the story of the Nabataeans, a desert civilization that mastered trade and engineering only to vanish into whispers. They left a kingdom of stone, but their true story is a labyrinth of riddles. By the end of this journey, you will uncover 25 of their most persistent mysteries, puzzles that challenge everything we think we know about ancient success. How did a nomadic people build a hydraulic empire in the sand, and why did their distinct voice fade into silence? What does it mean for a civilization to be so advanced, yet so determined to keep its secrets? The first and perhaps most fundamental mystery lies in the very words they spoke. The Nabataeans left behind thousands of inscriptions, carved into cliffs, tombs, and altars across their domain. We can read these words clearly, as they used a script derived from Aramaic, the common administrative language of the region. This script would later evolve into the Arabic alphabet we know today. But here is the profound silence. These inscriptions are almost entirely formulaic. They record names, they mark territories, they dedicate tombs to kings like Abodas or Aretas. They are legal and functional, the stone equivalent of official stamps and property deeds. What they are not is literature. We have no Nabataean epic poems, no religious hymns, no court chronicles, no private letters on papyrus. We have their handwriting, but we have lost their voice. This creates a startling paradox. Here was a people of immense sophistication, who negotiated with empires and engineered a city in the desert, yet they chose not to write down their stories, their laws in full, or their prayers in their own tongue. Did they pass everything down orally, trusting the spoken word over the carved one? Or did they write extensively on perishable materials like leather or papyrus, all of which vanished in the desert climate? The so-called Madaba map inscription, a later Byzantine mosaic referencing the region, and the foundational texts at Petra tell us who built a thing, but never why they built it or what they believed it meant. Their script gives us the skeleton of their history, the names and dates, but the flesh and blood of their culture, the myths that guided them and the songs they sang, have evaporated into the dry desert air. We stare at their words and hear only a whisper where we long for a conversation. This linguistic silence forces us to question their very identity. Who were the Nabataeans culturally, if their written legacy is so deliberately sparse? Their language was a form of Old Arabic, a North Arabian dialect, and their script is the direct ancestor of the Arabic alphabet used by billions today. This is a monumental legacy, yet it feels like a borrowed suit. They used this script to write Aramaic phrases, the lingua franca of business and diplomacy, much like English is used globally today. Their own Nabataean language seems to have been primarily spoken, reserved for the home, the market, and the campfire. This creates a fascinating cultural split. Publicly, for trade and royal decrees, they presented themselves in a cosmopolitan tongue. Privately, they maintained a rich oral tradition that has, by its very nature, been lost to us. Think of all the stories, the genealogies, the technical knowledge of desert survival and hydraulics that must have been passed from parent to child, from master artisan to apprentice, entirely through speech. That vibrant, living cultural core is what evaporated. Furthermore, as their kingdom became more entangled with the Roman world, first as an ally and later as a province, the pressure of other languages grew. Greek and Latin began to appear on official monuments and coins. These were the languages of empire, of prestige, and of broader economic opportunity. It is possible that the Nabataean elite began to adopt these tongues, slowly allowing their own written tradition to wither from lack of use. Were they so pragmatic that they saw no need to inscribe their culture in stone, believing their ways were secure in memory? Or was this a conscious choice to maintain an air of mystery, a cultural advantage in a world of competing powers? The puzzle of their language is not just about words, it is a window into a strategic mind. They built an empire not on written laws but on spoken agreements, not on published myths but on shared, unspoken understandings. This makes their physical achievements in Petra all the more astonishing, a city of stone built upon a foundation of air. This silence in their language makes their most dramatic monuments even more enigmatic. High above the city, on the summit of Jebel Madba, lies a site that feels closer to the sky than to the earth. This is the so-called high place of sacrifice, a complex of carved altars, benches, and reservoirs cut directly into the mountain peak. To reach it requires a steep climb, a journey that physically separates the pilgrim from the bustling city below. The traditional interpretation is right there in the name. A large, rectangular altar with a draining channel suggests liquid offerings, perhaps blood from animal sacrifices. A lower circular altar nearby could have been used for burning offerings. The imagery is powerful and visceral, a place where the community sought to connect with the divine through a profound physical act. The panoramic view from the summit is breathtaking, encompassing the entire Petra basin, a constant reminder that any ritual here was performed under the watchful eyes of the gods and the kingdom itself. Yet, the evidence is not so clear-cut. Those drainage channels could have carried blood, yes, but they could just as easily have carried water, wine, or oil used in libations, a peaceful offering poured out to honor the gods. The absence of any substantial bone findings at the site, which one might expect from centuries of animal sacrifice, has led scholars to propose quieter theories. Perhaps this high place was primarily an astronomical observatory. The twin obelisks carved from the living rock lower on the slope, and the precise orientation of certain features, could have been used to track the sun, the moon, and the stars, turning the summit into a giant calendar stone for a people who relied on precise timing for trade and agriculture. Another possibility is that it was a site for ritual feasts. The benches cut into the rock could have seated elders or priests for ceremonial meals, a communal act of sharing food with each other and with their deities. The act of climbing the mountain itself may have been the central ritual, a test of devotion and a symbolic ascent toward the divine. So was it a place of dramatic, bloody covenant, or one of quiet, celestial observation and communal bonding? The stone altars hold their silence, refusing to reveal whether they were stained with sacrifice or simply washed with water under the stars. This ambiguity forces us to ask a deeper question about the Nabataeans themselves. Were their most important rituals loud and public, or were they intimate and shrouded in secrecy? The answer might determine how we view their entire relationship with the world around them. Even the gods of the Nabataeans seem carved from the same stone of mystery. Scattered across their sacred sites, from the high places to tomb facades, are curious, often rectangular blocks of rock. These are not statues. They bear no human faces, no animal forms, no intricate carvings of limbs or clothing. They are simply shaped stones, sometimes standing alone, sometimes set within a niche, sometimes adorned with a simple crowning element that resembles a stylized face or a pair of eyes. These objects are known as baetyls, or more colloquially, god blocks. They represent a profound spiritual concept called aniconic worship. Instead of depicting a god in human or animal form, the Nabataeans believed the divine essence could inhabit a simple, unadorned stone. The block itself became a vessel, a focal point for reverence. Think of it as the difference between a detailed portrait of a powerful leader and their official seal or emblem. The seal does not show the person, but it carries their full authority. The baetyl was that sacred seal of a deity. This practice connects them to a much wider Semitic tradition, but the Nabataeans embraced it with particular devotion. The central, maddening puzzle for archaeologists is that while we can easily spot these god blocks, we almost never know which specific god is being honored. Was this plain rectangular stone meant to represent Dashara, the chief god of the Nabataeans, often associated with mountains and the sun? Or was it Al-Azza, the powerful goddess of fertility and protection, later known to the wider Arab world? Could it be Alat, the ancient mother goddess, or one of the other deities in their pantheon? The stones themselves offer no written labels. A baetyl carved on the facade of a tomb might be a guardian deity for that family. One placed high on a cliff face could be marking a boundary between the human and divine realms. A particularly fine example, like the famous baetyl in the Sikh with its stylized eyes and nose, might indicate a site of special pilgrimage. Yet without a clear inscription saying this stone is for Dashara, we are left guessing. The context sometimes offers clues. A baetyl found near a water channel might be linked to a water deity. One associated with a military outpost could be for a god of protection. But these are inferences, not answers. This creates a fascinating spiritual landscape where the divine was ever present, embodied in the very rock of the land, yet also deliberately anonymous and accessible only through faith, not through an image. It suggests a religion that valued the feeling of divine presence over the need for a detailed visual representation. The gods were everywhere in Petra, not as statues to be seen, but as silent, powerful blocks of stone to be felt. This leads us to another, even more tangible mystery. If their gods were represented by stone, what did their kings look like? This anonymity of their gods stands in stark contrast to the undeniable, tangible wealth their kingdom displayed. The fabulous tombs and temples of Petra were not carved by faith alone. They required immense capital, a steady flow of riches to pay armies of skilled artisans. For centuries, the answer seemed simple. The Nabataeans were the masters of the incense road, the indispensable middlemen who controlled the flow of frankincense and myrrh from southern Arabia to the empires of the Mediterranean. The scent of these precious resins was the scent of their wealth, but was it enough? Frankincense and myrrh were incredibly valuable, yes, but they were also luxury goods, their trade subject to the whims of distant markets and political stability. To build and sustain a hydraulic empire in the desert, the Nabataeans needed more diverse and reliable income. Their economic genius lay in not putting all their treasures in one spice jar. Look at a map of their territory, stretching from Damascus in the north to the Hejaz in the south. It was less a traditional kingdom and more a sprawling network of strategic assets. To the west, along the shores of the Dead Sea, they controlled a unique resource, bitumen. This natural tar was a vital commodity in the ancient world, used for waterproofing boats, sealing containers, and even in mummification. The Nabataeans essentially held a monopoly on its supply, harvesting it from the sea and selling it to Egypt and beyond. To the south, in the area of Wadi Fainan, lay rich copper mines. Archaeological evidence shows large-scale, sophisticated mining and smelting operations here, turning raw ore into another highly tradable metal. Then there was agriculture. The Nabataeans were not just traders passing through, they were settlers who made the desert bloom. By mastering water capture and storage, they cultivated vineyards, olive groves, and grain fields in places like the Negev, producing surplus food that could both feed their growing population and be traded. But perhaps their most ingenious revenue stream was not a physical product at all, but a service. They were the ultimate desert logistics company. Their hidden cisterns and guarded caravanserais along routes like the one to Gaza did not just support their own trade. They effectively sold safety and survival. Any merchant caravan wishing to cross the harsh deserts between Arabia and the Mediterranean would be foolish not to pay for access to the Nabataean water network and the protection their outposts offered. They were the gatekeepers of the desert, charging tolls for passage and providing essential services along the way. So their wealth was a pyramid. The luxury incense trade was the glittering apex, the most famous part. But the broad, stable base was built on copper, bitumen, grain, and the selling of water itself. This diversified portfolio reveals a civilization of astonishing pragmatism. They did not just find wealth in the desert, they manufactured it from every rock, every spring, and every trade route they could command. And to protect that wealth, they needed a formidable presence, a statement carved in stone that no rival could ignore. This brings us to the very heart of Petra and one of its most iconic yet misunderstood structures. Yet this pragmatic, diversified wealth created a cultural explosion that still defies easy explanation. For hundreds of years, the Nabataeans were successful nomads and traders, living in tents and simple stone dwellings. Their early capital at Petra was likely a seasonal gathering place, a fortified camp of modest structures. Then, in the 1st century before the Common Era, something extraordinary happened. Almost as if a switch was flipped, they began to carve, not small tombs or simple markers, but colossal, breathtaking facades directly into the sandstone cliffs. This period, often called the Petra Renaissance, saw the creation of masterpieces like the Treasury or Al-Kosneh, with its intricate Hellenistic columns and mythological figures. The scale and speed of this transformation is staggering. How does a society go from tents to temples in what seems like a single generation? One compelling theory points to their neighbors. By this time, the Nabataeans were in intense contact with the Hellenistic world, particularly the Ptolemaic Kingdom of Egypt and the Seleucid Empire to the north. They saw the grand stone cities these powers built, cities like Alexandria and Antioch. The elaborate facade of the treasury itself is a textbook example of Hellenistic architecture, with its Corinthian columns and central tholos or round temple. It is easy to assume the Nabataeans simply copied a style they admired, hiring foreign architects or training their own artisans to imitate these new forms. But imitation does not explain the sheer audacity of the project. Carving a 40-meter-high facade into a vertical cliff face is not like building with blocks. It is an act of supreme confidence and irreversible commitment. This leads to a second theory, a sudden, massive influx of wealth. The 1st century before the Common Era was a golden age for Nabataean trade. With the Roman Republic rising and the Hellenistic kingdoms fading, the Nabataeans positioned themselves perfectly as the essential link between East and West. Perhaps the accumulated profits of generations finally reached a critical mass, a treasury so overflowing that King Aretas IV, one of their greatest rulers, decided to literally invest it in the landscape. He may have commissioned the treasury as his own tomb, a statement of royal power so permanent it would awe subjects and intimidate rivals for all time. But there is a third, more intriguing possibility. What if this architectural flourish was not just about wealth or fashion, but a deliberate act of political and cultural self-definition? Faced with the overwhelming cultural influence of Greece and the growing military shadow of Rome, the Nabataean elite may have felt a pressing need to assert their own identity. They could have built a Greek-style city in the open plain. Instead, they chose to carve a Nabataean one into the mountain, using a foreign architectural language but on their own unforgiving, sacred terms. The facades were not just beautiful buildings, they were a declaration. They said, "We are not nomads anymore, but we are also not Greeks or Romans. We are the people of the rock, and this is our immutable, unconquerable home." The suddenness of the change might be an illusion of archaeology. Perhaps the skills were developing quietly for decades, in wooden structures and plaster decorations that have long since vanished, before finally finding their ultimate expression in stone. The puzzle remains: was the Petra Renaissance a borrowed style, a spending spree, or a civilization deciding, in stone, exactly who it wanted to be? This monumental ambition required more than just artistic vision. It demanded a secret, almost magical control over the one resource the desert withholds most fiercely. But the water that made Petra possible was a resource they could not fully control in their distant territories. Far to the south, in the deserts of what is now Saudi Arabia, lies their second great city, Hegra, known today as Mada'in Saleh. Here, the mystery is not of creation but of purpose. Hegra is a breathtaking sight, a Petra in miniature, with over 100 monumental tombs carved into the golden sandstone outcrops. The facades are unmistakably Nabataean, featuring the same stepped crowns, crow step motifs, and classical pediments. Some, like the magnificent Qasr al-Farid, stand in majestic isolation, a four-story tomb so meticulously carved it looks like a freestanding building. Yet for all this grandeur, archaeologists have found something profoundly puzzling. Hegra was never a major living city. There are no vast theaters, no sprawling marketplaces, no dense residential quarters like those in Petra. The settlement was small, more of a large outpost than a capital. So why would a civilization invest so much effort to carve a city of the dead in a place with so few living people? The first theory points to faith. Hegra may have been a major religious pilgrimage site, a sacred necropolis where Nabataeans from across the kingdom wished to be buried in holy ground. The concentration of tombs, many with inscriptions dedicating them to specific families or individuals, suggests it was a coveted final resting place, perhaps associated with a particular deity or a revered ancestor. The second theory is one of strategy. Located on the vital incense route further south, Hegra was a critical choke point. Controlling it meant controlling the flow of wealth from Arabia. The monumental tombs could have been a display of permanent power, a stone declaration to every passing caravan that this land was Nabataean territory, governed by ancestors whose watchful faces were carved into the cliffs themselves. It was a billboard of sovereignty written in rock. The third, more intimate possibility is that Hegra served as a royal burial ground for a southern branch of the kingdom, or for powerful merchant clans who amassed fortunes from the southern trade. The style of the tombs offers clues. While similar to Petra's, they are often simpler, with less of the elaborate Hellenistic decoration seen in the treasury or the monastery. The inscriptions at Hegra are also more numerous and detailed, giving us more names and familial relationships than we often find in Petra. This suggests a different social order, perhaps one where wealthy families, not just the king, could commission such grand eternal homes. Hegra feels like a statement of belonging. Where Petra was the beating heart of the kingdom, Hegra was its strong southern arm, a place to solidify their claim on the land and the trade routes through the enduring memory of the dead. It raises a haunting question. Did they build these tombs because they planned for Hegra to grow into another Petra, a dream that never materialized? Or was the silence of a necropolis always the intended goal, a permanent garrison of stone sentinels guarding the desert? The silent, watchful tombs of Hegra were monuments to permanence, but the true lifeblood of the Nabataean kingdom flowed unseen. To support a population that may have reached 30,000 in Petra alone, they performed a miracle of reverse alchemy. They turned stone into water. This was not magic, but a mastery of hydraulics so complete it remains their most dazzling technical achievement. The puzzle is not that they built a water system, but the breathtaking scale and foresight embedded in every channel and cistern. Imagine a city built in a bowl of sandstone, surrounded by mountains, in a region where rain might fall only a handful of days each year. The average citizen in Petra likely had better, more reliable access to fresh water than many people in ancient cities built on great rivers. How the system began high in the hills, far from the city center. They constructed massive dams to capture the violent flash floods that would otherwise scour through the narrow, sick gorge. These dams were not just barriers, they were intelligent diverters, channeling the torrent into a network of pipelines. They carved channels along the cliff faces, sometimes tunneling directly through rock to maintain a gentle, consistent slope. They lined these channels with waterproof cement. They built hundreds of cisterns, both large public reservoirs and small private ones, hidden throughout the city and its surroundings, all designed to capture and store every possible drop. The most ingenious parts are invisible. Walking through the narrow, winding Siq today, you see towering cliffs, but within those cliffs the Nabataeans embedded terracotta pipes. They literally ran a pressurized water main through the heart of their sacred entrance, delivering clean water directly to the city center and to the great temple of the winged lions. This was not crude irrigation, it was urban plumbing. The unanswered questions are profound. How did they initially survey this vast, rocky terrain to plot the perfect gravity-fed gradient without modern instruments? Did they use simple water levels, or did they possess a sophisticated understanding of geometry passed down through generations of desert travel? Who maintained this labyrinth? Was there a guild of water engineers, a privileged class whose sole duty was to monitor and repair the channels, a social structure built around hydraulic care? Perhaps most intriguingly, did they have maps, not maps of roads but hydrological maps, charts showing the entire watershed, the locations of every spring, every cistern, and every pipeline? Such a document would have been a state secret more valuable than gold. Their system was so precise, so resilient that it functioned for centuries. It allowed for public fountains, lush gardens, and even ritual baths. The water system was the true foundation of Petra's power, a hidden, humming machine of stone and clay that made the desert not just livable but luxurious. It proves their genius was not in conquering nature but in conducting it like a maestro directing a scarce and precious symphony. The very water that gave Petra life flowed from the mountains, and it was to the mountains that the Nabataeans looked for their highest god. His name was Dashara, meaning he of the Shara, the mountain range that cradled their capital. Yet pinning down the true identity of this chief deity is like trying to hold smoke. The later empires that absorbed Nabataean lands had no trouble identifying him. To the Greeks, he was simply Zeus, the king of the gods. To the Romans, he was equated with Dionysus, the god of wine, fertility, and ecstatic liberation. These connections tell us how outsiders saw him through their own cultural lens, but they obscure the original Nabataean vision. So who was Dashara before these foreign labels were attached? The evidence points in several, often contradictory, directions. His name ties him directly to the Shara Mountains, suggesting a powerful local deity of the high places, a spirit of the rock itself. This fits the aniconic tradition perfectly, a god so fundamentally part of the landscape that he needed no human form, only a sacred stone, but other clues hint at a far broader domain. Some inscriptions and later interpretations suggest he was also a sun god, a celestial ruler whose journey across the sky mirrored Nabataean control over the desert below. More intriguingly, there are hints he may have had chthonic or underworld aspects, linking him to fertility, the life that springs from the earth, and perhaps even to the realm of the dead where his people built their eternal tombs. This combination is not impossible. A deity can be of the mountain, the sun, and the earth all at once. But the maddening lack of early imagery or detailed theological texts means we are assembling a puzzle with most of the pieces missing. We see his worship everywhere, in the high places, in the dedications on tombs, in the very name of their king, Aratas, which means beloved of the god. But we cannot see him. This changes only later under Roman influence. From this period, we have a remarkable artifact, a stone bust found near Petra. It shows a bearded classical face with curling hair and a serene, powerful expression. It looks like Zeus, but the inscription confirms this is meant to be Dashara. This is the great paradox. For centuries, his presence was felt in formless stone. Then, finally given a face, he wears the mask of a foreign god. So which is the real Dashara? The silent, omnipotent force of the mountain, or this dignified, Hellenized king? The answer is likely both. The bust does not replace the earlier god, it clothes him. It represents a civilization adapting its most sacred symbol for a new world, translating its deepest truths into a language that growing empires could understand. The mystery of Dashara, then, is the mystery of the Nabataeans themselves, a people whose core identity remained rooted in the rock, even as they learned to speak in the artistic tongue of their neighbors. The face of Dashara, carved in a foreign style, hints at a monarchy comfortable with adaptation. Yet the very kings who may have commissioned such portraits left no clear home for us to find. In a city overflowing with monumental architecture, one vital structure is conspicuously absent. Where did the Nabataean kings actually live? Petra boasts the towering treasury, the vast monastery, the ornate royal tombs, and a theatre carved to seat thousands. But archaeologists have never definitively identified a royal palace complex. This is not a small oversight, it is a gaping hole in the city's map. For a civilization that invested so heavily in permanent, awe-inspiring stonework, the lack of a known royal residence is profoundly strange. Several candidates exist, but each comes with frustrating caveats. The area known as the Royal Tombs, a majestic row of facades high on the eastern cliff face, includes the Urn Tomb and the Silk Tomb. Their scale and prominence suggest they were built for the highest elite. Some scholars propose that these were not just tombs, but also served as ceremonial palaces for the living, perhaps for funerary rites or annual commemorations. Yet their interiors, while large, are essentially cavernous halls with burial niches, not the subdivided living quarters, administrative rooms, and courtyards one expects of a permanent royal dwelling. Another possibility lies across the valley on the towering mesa of al-Biyara. This massive, flat-topped rock dominates Petra's skyline, a natural fortress. It is largely unexcavated, and the summit could easily have housed a secluded royal complex, safe from the city's bustle below. The logistical challenge of hauling water and supplies up such a steep climb would have been immense, but not impossible for the Nabataeans. However, preliminary investigations have so far revealed only simpler, earlier Edomite settlements, not the grand palace one might hope for. The most compelling theory may be the simplest and the most revealing. Perhaps the kings of Petra never built a single, fixed stone palace because they did not live like that. Their power and identity were rooted in the traditions of the desert caravan. Even at their height, they may have maintained a semi-nomadic court, living in luxurious tents within the city basin or in compounds of perishable materials that have left no trace. Their true palace might have been mobile, a collection of opulent fabrics, fine rugs, and wooden frameworks that could be assembled and disassembled, moving with the seasons or the king's itinerary between Petra, Hegra, and other outposts. This would explain the missing evidence. It paints a picture of a ruler who was always among his people, accessible in a way a stone citadel would forbid, and whose authority flowed not from an isolated fortress, but from his presence and his control over the life-giving trade routes. The missing palace, then, is not an archaeological failure, but a potential clue. It suggests that even in their greatest city, carved in eternal stone, the Nabataean kings may have never fully abandoned the flexible, moving world of the desert from which they came. Descending from the cliffside tombs into the heart of Petra, you encounter a sprawling complex of stone that challenges all assumptions. This is the so-called Great Temple, a vast excavated area covering nearly 80,000 square feet in the very center of the city. Its grand name was given by hopeful early archaeologists, but its true purpose remains one of Petra's most contentious debates. Was this the spiritual heart of the kingdom, or was it something else entirely? The architecture sends mixed signals. You approach up a monumental staircase flanked by rows of columns with elephant-headed capitals, a unique and puzzling artistic choice. The main precinct opens into a large lower temple which leads to a stunning, theater-like installation. Here, steep banks of stone seats, a theatron, face a small central stage. This is not a public theater for thousands, but a more intimate space, perhaps seating a few hundred. Directly beside this, archaeologists uncovered the remains of an elaborate garden complex, complete with underground water channels and root holes for plants and small trees. A temple to a chief god like Dashara would typically focus on an altar, a cult statue, or a sacred stone. Yet here, the most prominent features are seats for an audience and a cultivated garden. Where are the altars? Where are the niches for baetyls? The few religious items found are scattered and not central to the layout. This has led to a fascinating reinterpretation. Perhaps the Great Temple was not a temple in the traditional sense. The theater-like seats suggest a space for performance, oration, or legal proceedings. The grand columned halls could have been used for royal audiences where the king received ambassadors and settled disputes. The exquisite garden, a miraculous luxury in the desert, points toward lavish banqueting, a place for the elite to feast and solidify social bonds. The best guess now is that it served all these functions, a multi-purpose civic and ceremonial center. It might have been the Nabataean equivalent of a town hall, a supreme court, and a royal reception palace all fused into one. Religious ceremonies could certainly have taken place here, but they may have been part of larger state events, blending governance, celebration, and reverence into a single ritual of power. This lack of a purely, obviously sacred space tells us something profound about Nabataean society. For them, the divine, the political, and the social may not have lived in separate buildings. Their most important communal acts, whether honoring a god, welcoming a trade delegation, or celebrating a harvest, might have all unfolded within the same magnificent, versatile complex. The stones of the Great Temple do not whisper prayers, they echo with the layered sounds of an entire civilization in conversation with itself. But the grand civic space of the Great Temple is not the only structure that speaks of distant connections. Tucked away on a terrace overlooking the city center stands a far smaller, yet equally perplexing building known today as the Blue Chapel. Its name comes from a stunning, almost magical detail. While most of Petra is a symphony of warm, rose-red and yellow sandstone, the 4 columns supporting this chapel's porch are carved from a cool, blue-veined granite. This stone did not come from the local mountains. Chemical analysis confirms it was quarried in Egypt from the distant hills near Aswan, over 1,000 kilometers away. This simple fact opens a logistical puzzle of staggering proportions. Each column is a single, solid piece of stone weighing many tons. To get them to Petra, the Nabataeans first had to have them quarried and roughly shaped in Egypt. Then they were loaded onto barges and floated hundreds of kilometers down the Nile River. At a port, they were transferred to seagoing ships for a voyage up the eastern coast of the Sinai Peninsula. Finally, they were offloaded and dragged by sled or wagon across the brutal, trackless desert for the last, most punishing leg of the journey. The cost in labor, time, and money must have been astronomical. Why go to such extraordinary lengths for 4 columns? The answer is not about structural necessity. Local sandstone was abundant, easier to carve, and perfectly strong. This was a deliberate, extravagant choice. The blue granite was a statement in solid rock. It declared that the Nabataean elite had the wealth, the influence, and the sophisticated trade networks to command the resources of an entire empire. Possessing such exotic materials was a form of power display, akin to wearing silk from China or spices from India. It connected this small chapel visually and materially to the great pharaonic and Roman monuments of Egypt, borrowing a sliver of their timeless prestige. The contrast is visually arresting. Imagine the warm, soft glow of the Petra sandstone against the hard, crystalline sparkle of the imported blue stone, especially under the bright desert sun. This was not just architecture, it was a curated experience designed to awe anyone who approached. But what was the chapel for? Its small size suggests it was not a major public temple. Some believe it was part of a bishop's complex from the later Byzantine period when Petra was a Christian city, repurposing these magnificent pagan columns. Others argue its layout and location point to an earlier Nabataean function, perhaps a private shrine for the royal family or a meeting place for a priestly council. The granite columns, therefore, stand as permanent questions. Were they a king's vanity, a merchant's offering, or a priest's demand? Their very presence whispers of a kingdom so deeply woven into the fabric of ancient trade that the desert was no barrier. only a highway waiting to be crossed with the right price. This mastery of logistics hints at a hidden world of commerce, one where the Nabataeans did not just move goods, but perhaps traded in something far more valuable than spices or stone. The blue granite columns were a testament to global reach, but the name of the city they stood in was a local mystery. We call it Petra, a Greek word meaning rock, a label given by outsiders who marveled at its carved cliffs. But the Nabataeans themselves likely knew their capital by another name, one found in a handful of their own inscriptions, Rakhmu. This simple word unlocks a complex puzzle of borders and identity. What exactly was Rakhmu? When a Nabataean merchant said he was traveling to Rakhmu, what was he picturing? Was it just the stunning, enclosed basin with the treasury and the theater, the part we visit today? Or did Rakhmu mean something much larger, an entire administrative district that included the sprawling suburbs, the terraced farms on the surrounding plateaus, the distant guard posts, and the vital water catchment systems in the far-off hills? This is not just a question of semantics, it changes everything about how we understand the city's scale and function. If Rakhmu was only the core, then Petra was a dense, urban heart with a population concentrated in perhaps 20 or 30,000 people. But if Rakhmu was the greater territory, then the city transforms into a decentralized, organic network. The true capital would have included the farmers living on the high plains growing food, the soldiers manning the outposts controlling the approaches, and the engineers tending the distant dams. The population could have been significantly larger, more dispersed, and intimately tied to the land. Think of it like the difference between defining London as just the financial district of the city versus Greater London with its countless boroughs and green belts. One is a dense nucleus of power, the other is a living, breathing ecosystem. The administrative reality probably lay somewhere in between. The core basin was the ceremonial and economic center, the undeniable showpiece. But the authority of the kings, the reach of Rakhmu, extended along every water channel and caravan track that fed it. This blurred boundary reflects a nomadic heritage where a tribe's territory was defined by its range and resources, not by a city wall. The puzzle of Rakhmu's true size forces us to ask, where did the city end and the kingdom begin? For a people who turned a desert into a garden, the lines on their mental map may have been drawn not in stone, but around every hidden spring and every safe passage they commanded. The ability to move mountains of stone and rivers of water speaks of a civilization's strength, but sometimes its soul is found in the delicate curve of a cup. Among the most beautiful and personal artifacts the Nabataeans left behind is their pottery. This was not the coarse, utilitarian ware of a desert outpost. Nabataean pottery, especially from its peak between the 1st century before the Common Era and the 1st century after, is a masterpiece of subtlety. Artisans threw vessels with walls so incredibly thin they are almost eggshell delicate. They then painted them with elegant, minimalist designs in dark red or black against a pale pink or cream background. The motifs are flowing and organic, often just a few graceful vines, leaves, or simple geometric patterns. There is a serene confidence to it, a quiet luxury meant for the tables of a sophisticated elite. For archaeologists, this distinct style is a perfect time capsule. Finding a shard of this fine painted ware at a dig site is like finding a fingerprint. It instantly signals Nabataean presence, trade, or influence. Which makes what happened next so perplexing. Sometime in the 2nd century after the Common Era, not long after the Roman annexation of the kingdom in 106, this beautiful, centuries-old tradition seems to vanish. The production of classic, thin-walled Nabataean painted pottery ceases almost completely. The mystery is not that pottery continued to be made in the region, it did. But the new styles were different, heavier, and often reflected more generic Roman provincial tastes. It is as if a unique dialect of art suddenly fell silent. Why would a people stop making something so central to their daily life and aesthetic identity? One practical theory is economic. The Roman annexation integrated the region into a vast imperial market. Perhaps local potters could not compete with the flood of cheaper, mass-produced Roman goods arriving on new trade routes that now bypassed Petra's old networks. The delicate Nabataean ware, requiring highly skilled artisans, may have become an unaffordable luxury in a new economy. Another, darker possibility is a simple loss of knowledge. If the annexation disrupted society, if the elite patrons who commissioned this fine ware lost their status or wealth, the master potters and their apprentices might have scattered. The precise techniques for that perfect clay mix, that firing temperature, and those painted designs passed down through generations could have been lost within a single lifetime. But there is a third, more cultural angle. After annexation, to be successful often meant to become Roman. Adopting Roman styles in dress, architecture, and even tableware was a path to social and political advancement. The beautiful old Nabataean pottery might have come to be seen as backward, as a symbol of a subjugated past. Choosing to use a Roman-style cup could have been a quiet, daily act of assimilation. So did this art form die from competition, from forgotten skills, or from a collective decision to look toward a new future? The shattered pieces of these exquisite vessels offer no clear answer. They only tell us that something intimate and beautiful faded away, leaving behind a silent question on every broken shelf. The silent beauty of Nabataean pottery leaves us grasping for their words, and nowhere is that silence more profound than in their final resting places. Scattered across the cliffs of Petra and Hegra are hundreds of monumental tombs, their facades shouting power and prestige to the world. Yet step inside and you are met with a hollow echo. The overwhelming majority of these tombs were cleaned out in antiquity, looted of their contents so completely that we are left with cavernous, empty chambers. This is a historical theft that robs us of more than gold. Imagine what those tombs might have originally held. Beyond personal jewelry or ceremonial weapons, they could have contained sealed archives, papyrus scrolls with legal contracts, religious texts, or even personal letters. A single intact royal tomb could have provided the missing library of Nabataean literature, the detailed genealogies of their kings, or the sacred hymns to Dashara. Instead, we have only the stone shell, a magnificent safe whose combination has been lost, its treasures scattered to the winds centuries before archaeology began. This silence forces a difficult question. Were the tombs always relatively sparse, or did they once gleam with the accumulated wealth of the incense road? The looters took the answer with them. The few inscriptions we do find inside these tombs deepen the mystery rather than solve it. Carved around a burial niche or above a doorway, they are stunningly minimalist. A typical one reads something like, "This is the tomb that Aratus, son of Abodas, made for himself and his children." It states the facts of ownership and construction, nothing more. There are no lengthy biographies praising the deceased's deeds in battle or trade, no poetic verses mourning their departure, no detailed instructions for the afterlife or prayers to guide the soul. Compare this to an Egyptian tomb, covered in spells from the Book of the Dead and scenes of the deceased meeting the gods, or a Roman mausoleum with a long, eloquent epitaph recounting a lifetime of public service. The Nabataean approach is starkly different. This brevity is likely a profound cultural and religious choice. It suggests a belief system where the tomb itself, the act of its creation in the sacred rock, was the primary ritual. The inscription was a legal marker, a permanent deed of ownership for eternity. The afterlife may have been conceived as a shadowy continuation of familial lineage within the rock, requiring the name to be remembered but not a detailed resume. Perhaps they believed the soul's journey was private between the individual and the deity, not something to be spelled out for human readers. Or maybe, in a society that valued oral tradition, The full story of the person was told in spoken eulogies and remembered by the living, not frozen in stone. The cryptic tomb inscriptions, then, are not a lack of feeling but a different kind of respect. They treat death as a factual transition and the magnificent facade as the true testament to a life's worth, making the emptiness inside all the more haunting. Those empty tombs speak of a quiet end, but the kingdom's final political moments are shrouded in a different kind of silence. The last ruler to bear the title king of the Nabataeans was Rabel II. His reign was long, spanning over 4 decades, a period of apparent stability and even prosperity. Yet his end and the transition that followed are wrapped in shadows. The historical record simply notes that he died and that the Roman Emperor Trajan annexed the kingdom in the year 106. But the mechanics of that handover are a profound puzzle. Did Rabel die of natural causes, leaving a clear succession that Rome simply absorbed? Or was his death more sinister, part of a political collapse that invited or even required Roman intervention? We know he had a successor, a man named either Rabel III or simply a governor, but his authority seems to have been fleeting and ill-defined. The lack of any detailed account of a struggle suggests there was no dramatic civil war, no last stand of the Nabataean royal house. This absence of conflict is itself telling. It implies that by the early 2nd century, the institution of the Nabataean monarchy may have already been hollowed out, its power and legitimacy waning from within long before the eagles of Rome arrived. Perhaps the merchant families and regional elites had grown more powerful, their loyalties shifting to the economic guarantees of the Roman peace rather than to a distant king. Rabel II might have been less a sovereign and more a caretaker, presiding over a kingdom that was already becoming a province in all but name. His death, whenever and however it came, may have been merely the formal cue for a transition everyone saw coming. This leads directly into the 17th puzzle, the nature of the annexation itself. In the year 106, Emperor Trajan formally declared the Nabataean Kingdom as the new Roman province of Arabia Petra. The question is, how did this happen? Was it a brutal military conquest, the crushing of a defiant people, or was it a peaceful, almost bureaucratic integration? The evidence overwhelmingly points toward the latter, and that is what makes it so strange. Archaeologists have found no evidence of a great destructive battle at Petra or Hegra. There are no layers of ash, no hastily built defensive walls, no mass graves from that period. The city shows no signs of violent sack. Instead, the Roman legions seem to have marched in and started building, not fighting. They constructed the iconic straight road from Syria to the Red Sea, the Via Nova Traiana, right through the heart of the Old Kingdom, a project of connection and control, not subjugation. This smooth transition suggests a prior agreement, a quiet understanding between the Nabataean elite and Rome. The kingdom's legendary wealth had been declining for decades as Roman ships began to bypass the overland incense routes by sailing directly to Arabia. Their economic raison d'etre was fading. Faced with this slow decline, the leading families of Petra may have calculated that their future lay not in a costly, doomed resistance, but in becoming partners in the Roman system. They could trade their political independence for economic security and social status within the empire. So Trajan's annexation may have been less a conquest and more a corporate takeover, approved by the board of directors. The silence in the archaeological record is not a gap, it is the sound of a deal being made. The Nabataean Kingdom did not fall with a bang, but with a whisper, a negotiated surrender to an inevitable future, leaving its magnificent stone city to become a beautiful but provincial Roman backwater. The smooth transition into Roman rule preserved the city's stones, but perhaps it was the sky that truly guided their original design. High on a mountain opposite the city center stands the monastery, or Ad-Dair, a monument even larger than the treasury. Its massive facade is carved into a remote cliff, a destination reached only by a long, arduous climb. For decades, it was seen as a remote temple or tomb, impressive but isolated. Then, researchers with a keen eye on the horizon noticed something peculiar. On certain days of the year, specifically around the winter solstice, the last rays of the setting sun strike the doorway of the monastery in a very specific way. The low, angled light is theorized to illuminate the central niche inside the main chamber, a place that might have once held a sacred baetyl. This is not a random event, but a potential alignment, a deliberate architectural choice to connect this holiest of inner spaces with the sun's most southerly setting point, the symbolic rebirth of the year. The same questions swirl around the treasury. Some studies suggest its iconic central doorway was oriented so that the first light of the summer solstice sunrise would flood directly into the inner chamber. Imagine that moment, the dawn of the longest day, a blade of golden light slicing through the dark, narrow sick to strike the heart of what was likely a royal tomb or temple. The symbolic power is immense, connecting the king or the god within to the cyclical, life-giving power of the sun itself. The evidence, however, is hotly debated. Critics argue that the alignments are not precise enough, that slight variations in the original doorways or later erosion could throw off these calculations. They suggest we might be guilty of pareidolia, of seeing meaningful patterns in random arrangements, a common temptation when studying ancient sites. After all, if you measure enough buildings against enough celestial events, some will appear to align by pure chance. Yet the possibility is too compelling to dismiss outright. The Nabataeans were masterful surveyors and engineers, capable of plotting water channels over miles with perfect gradients. Aligning a doorway to a solstice sunrise would have been well within their technical ability. More importantly, their religion was deeply tied to the natural world, to mountains, stones, and the life-giving sun. Aligning their most important structures with celestial events would be a profound expression of that belief, turning their architecture into a giant, permanent calendar and a mechanism for ritual. The debate continues, with modern archaeologists using three-dimensional modeling and precise GPS to test the theories. Each solstice, observers still gather at these sites, hoping the desert sky will offer a clue. Whether these alignments were intentional or imagined, the very search forces us to look at Petra not just as a collection of beautiful buildings, but as a potential mirror to the cosmos, a city that may have been designed not just for the people below, but in conversation with the heavens above. A single, enigmatic monument stands apart in Petra's vast gallery of symbols. Carved from a freestanding block of stone, it resembles a short, stout column, but its crown is what captures and holds the gaze. There, coiling upon the flat top, is the clear, unmistakable form of a snake. In a visual language dominated by geometric patterns, eagles, and mythical figures, this serpent is a startling anomaly. Snakes are almost entirely absent from the mainstream Nabataean artistic repertoire found on tomb facades and temple friezes. So what is this solitary stone serpent doing here, and who was meant to see it? One compelling theory ties it to the realm of healing. In the Greco-Roman world, the snake was the sacred animal of Asclepius, the god of medicine. The serpent's ability to shed its skin symbolized renewal and regeneration. Shrines to Asclepius, known as Asclepians, were places of pilgrimage where the sick would come for ritual cures and dream therapy. Could this have been a Nabataean adaptation of such a healing cult? A traveler or a local afflicted by illness might come to this monument to leave an offering, to touch the stone, or to sleep nearby in hopes of a curative vision. The snake would not be a threat but a promise of restored health, a symbol of divine power over the body's fragility. Yet there is a deeper, more local possibility. The snake is also a profoundly chthonic symbol, a creature of the earth and the underworld. It moves between realms, slithering from cracks in the rock, connected to the ground in a way no other animal is. For a people whose gods were often embodied in stone, a snake carved atop a pillar could represent a deity of the earth itself, perhaps a guardian of springs, caves, or the fertile soil. This monument might have marked a specific numinous spot, a place where the veil between the surface world and the subterranean one was considered thin. Its purpose could have been apotropaic, meant to ward off evil, or it could have been an object of direct veneration, a focal point for offerings to ensure the land's continued fertility. The very isolation of the symbol is a clue. It suggests this was not a state-sponsored official cult like that of Dashara, but a niche practice. Perhaps it served a specific guild like the potters or the water engineers who had their own patron spirits. Or maybe it reflects the beliefs of a foreign community living within Petra, merchants from Greece or Egypt who brought their devotional practices with them and carved a piece of home into the local rock. The snake monument refuses to fit neatly into our understanding of Nabataean religion. It whispers of personal faith, of specialized needs, and of the quiet, diverse ways people in a cosmopolitan city sought comfort, healing, or connection to the unseen forces of the world just beneath their feet. Beneath the visible city of carved facades and plazas lies another, hidden Petra. While the engineered water channels are well documented, persistent rumors and fragmented clues point to something more mysterious, a network of man-made tunnels and subterranean chambers buried deep within the bedrock. These are not the obvious water conduits, but sealed passages and rooms whose original purpose has been swallowed by the dark. One of the most tantalizing rumors speaks of a secret tunnel near the treasury. Local lore and some early explorer accounts suggest a passageway leading from the base of that iconic facade back into the mountain, perhaps connecting to other tombs or to a hidden chamber. Modern archaeological surveys using ground-penetrating radar have indeed detected anomalies, voids in the rock that suggest artificial spaces behind or beneath known structures. Yet these spaces remain largely unexplored, their entrances likely buried under centuries of silt and collapse. The immediate question is, why build in the dark? Practical reasons come first. Deep, cool, subterranean spaces would have been perfect for secure storage, safeguarding the kingdom's grain reserves, trade goods, or even the royal treasury itself from the desert heat and potential thieves. Another possibility is that they served as escape routes or secret corridors for the elite, allowing movement between key points in the city unseen, a strategic advantage in times of unrest. But the most captivating theory ventures into the spiritual. Could these underground spaces have been used for secret rituals, initiations, or ceremonies related to chthonic deities, rites that required total separation from the world above and the light of the sun? The conceptual leap from a water cistern to a ritual chamber is not large for a people who saw the divine in stone. The great challenge is excavation. Petra is an archaeological site of unparalleled fragility. The sandstone is soft, and any intrusive digging risks destabilizing the very monuments above. Uncovering a buried tunnel network would be a painstaking, decades-long process, requiring not just shovels, but endoscopic cameras and robotic probes to map the voids before anyone ever enters. The potential reward, however, is staggering. A single intact subterranean chamber could hold the untouched grave goods of a king, a sealed archive of scrolls, or the undisturbed paraphernalia of a mystery cult. For now, these tunnels remain in the realm of echo and shadow, a literal underworld to Petra's sunlit splendor, reminding us that even after centuries of exploration, the city's deepest secrets may still be lying in wait just beneath our feet. The hidden tunnels beneath Petra speak of a culture comfortable with secrets, but their most public and lasting code was written on the open rock. While the Nabataean language itself faded into silence, the physical script they used to write it became a legacy that shaped history. This script is a puzzle of origins and adaptation. It did not spring from the desert fully formed. Instead, it evolved directly from Imperial Aramaic, the common administrative script of the Near East, much like how the Latin alphabet was adapted by countless European languages. The Nabataeans, master pragmatists, adopted a tool of commerce and governance and then, over centuries, made it their own. The mystery lies in the details of that transformation. When exactly did the Nabataean hand become distinct from its Aramaic parent? Where did this stylistic shift first occur, in the royal chancery of Petra or in the far-flung trading outposts? And how consistent was this new script across a kingdom that stretched from Damascus to the Hejaz? The answers are carved in stone, a visual detective story written in strokes and curves. Early inscriptions, like those from the reign of King Aretas III in the 1st century before the Common Era, show letters that are still quite formal and close to their Aramaic prototypes. The characters are often separate, with sharp, angular forms suited for chiseling into hard surfaces. But as you move forward in time, the script begins to loosen up, to flow. You can see the change in later tomb inscriptions and most clearly in the thousands of casual graffiti left by travelers and pilgrims in places like the Sinai Peninsula. Here, written more quickly, perhaps with a brush or a stylus on softer material, the letters start to connect. They develop ligatures where one character flows into the next to allow for faster writing. The angles soften into curves. Certain letters, like the one for Aleph, begin to shrink and change form. This was not a top-down reform, but a natural, organic evolution driven by daily use. The scribes and merchants of the Nabataean realm were streamlining their tool for efficiency, much like cursive developed from printed letters. This living, changing script became the vehicle for their legal contracts, their tomb dedications, and their boundary markers. It encoded the entire administrative machinery of their kingdom. Then, in the centuries after the Roman annexation, as spoken Nabataean faded, this script found a new voice. It was adopted by Arab communities to the south and east, who used it to write early Arabic poetry and eventually the verses of the Quran. The flowing Nabataean cursive directly fathered the early Arabic scripts of Kufic and Naskh. So the script that began as a borrowed tool for trade in Petra ended up carrying one of the world's great literary traditions. The puzzle is in tracing that journey on the stone canvas they left behind, watching a practical business hand slowly become the sacred calligraphy of empires. The script that carried their words into history was a tool of connection, but some of their smallest artifacts speak a language of pure, silent mystery. Scattered across domestic sites and shrines, archaeologists have unearthed hundreds of small, crudely shaped stone or clay figurines. They are simple, almost abstract, often just a rounded body with two large, deeply incised circles representing eyes. These are the so-called eye idols. They fit in the palm of your hand, personal and unassuming, yet their meaning is profoundly elusive. Were they protective deities, miniature household gods placed in a niche to watch over a family? The prominent, staring eyes could symbolize constant vigilance, warding off the evil eye or malicious spirits from the home. Or were they representations of ancestors, a physical link to the departed, their watchful presence maintained among the living? Another possibility is that they were votive offerings. A person seeking a favor from a god, perhaps for healing or safe travel, might purchase one of these simple idols and leave it at a temple as a physical token of their prayer, the eyes symbolizing the petitioner's hope and attention. The sheer number and simplicity of these objects suggest they were part of everyday folk religion, a personal spiritual practice that existed alongside the grand state cults of Dashara. They remind us that for all the monumental theology carved in cliffs, the most common Nabataean religious experience might have been a quiet prayer whispered to a small, wide-eyed stone figure on a shelf, a humble mystery that will never speak its name. This personal, protective gaze may have been mirrored on a divine, colossal scale. Among the pantheon, one goddess stands out for her potent duality, Al-Uzza. To the Nabataeans, she was a powerful, sovereign deity. Later, Greek and Roman visitors equated her with Aphrodite, the goddess of love, and with Isis, the Egyptian mother goddess. This connection hints at her aspects of fertility and protection. but there is compelling evidence that Al-Azza had a far fiercer side, that of a warrior goddess, a divine protectress of the kingdom itself. How do we reconcile the image of a nurturing mother with that of a battle-ready guardian? The clues are in the landscape and in later traditions. Her primary sanctuary was at Petra, but she was also worshipped at a famous site farther north near the oasis of Wadi Ram. Here, a massive stone block was dedicated to her, a place where caravans would stop to make offerings for safe passage through the treacherous desert. This was not just a request for fertility, but for survival against bandits, sandstorms, and thirst. She was the guardian of the routes, the divine insurance policy for the Nabataean economy. Furthermore, the kings themselves seem to have placed themselves under her special protection. Some scholars believe the title servant of Al-Azza was used by Nabataean monarchs, linking their royal authority directly to her martial power. In a world where trade was war by other means, a goddess who could protect a caravan was as strategically vital as a general who could protect a border. Her depictions, though rare, sometimes show her armed, and later Arab tradition remembers her as a formidable warrior deity. The mystery of Al-Azza is the mystery of a civilization's needs. She embodies the two pillars of Nabataean life, the nurturing fertility that made the desert bloom and the fierce protection required to safeguard the wealth that bloom produced. She was both the mother and the soldier, a divine reflection of a people who had to be gentle enough to cultivate gardens and tough enough to defend them in an unforgiving world. The silent, watchful eyes of the household idols saw a world made green by sheer will. Far from the rose-red cliffs of Petra, in the stark, hyper-arid Negev desert, the Nabataeans performed their most audacious act of defiance. They turned barren rock into fields of grain, vineyards, and olive groves. The ruins of cities like Avdat stand as a monumental puzzle, not of art but of survival. Here, on a high plateau receiving barely a few inches of rain a year, they built a thriving agricultural society. The scale of their achievement is visible from the air, a vast geometric web of stone lines stretching to the horizon. These are not city walls, but the bones of a lost farming system. They constructed low stone walls called terraces across the slopes of entire watersheds. These walls were not to hold soil in place for planting, but to slow the rare, violent flash floods. When rain did fall on the distant hills, the water would rush down, but these terraces would check its speed, forcing it to spread out, sink into the ground, and deposit its precious load of silt and moisture. They then channeled the managed runoff through a network of stone conduits into vast plaster-lined cisterns and directly onto fields planted in the wadi beds below. It was a masterpiece of passive engineering, capturing every possible drop. But could this system truly sustain cities year after year? Modern climate data offers a partial clue, suggesting the region may have experienced a slightly wetter period during the peak of Nabataean power, perhaps with more frequent, predictable dew or occasional storms. Yet, even with a modest increase, this remains a desert on the very edge of habitability. Their genius was in amplification, using stone to multiply the effect of every millimeter of rain. The real puzzle is not how it worked, but why it stopped. For centuries, these fields fed the caravans and fortified towns along the incense route. Then the system fell silent. Was it a dramatic climate shift back to deeper aridity that finally overwhelmed their intricate stone networks, or was the collapse more human? After the Roman annexation, the political and economic landscape changed. The old trade routes that required these desert-way stations may have declined, shifting imperial priorities away from maintaining such a labor-intensive, remote agricultural system. Without the centralized Nabataean Kingdom to organize the massive communal effort of clearing silt from terraces and repairing channels, the knowledge and the will to maintain the system could have simply faded within a few generations. The desert farms of the Negev stand as a haunting testament to a civilization that could bend a brutal environment to its needs, but could not guarantee that its children would remember how to hold the bow. Yet even the most powerful protectress could not shield the royal dead from the final, perfect mystery. We have walked among their grandest monuments, the urn tomb with its towering colonnade, the palace tomb mimicking a royal residence, and the silk tomb with its swirling, colorful facade. These are called the royal tombs for a reason. Their scale and prominence in the heart of Petra's necropolis speak of occupants who ruled an empire. Yet, in a city obsessed with carving identity into rock, the most important identities of all are missing. Not a single one of these breathtaking monuments has been definitively linked to a specific known king. Where is the tomb of Aratus IV, the ruler who oversaw Petra's golden age and likely commissioned the treasury? Where does Obodas III, the king deified as a god, truly rest? The facades are silent on this crucial point. The inscriptions, when they exist, name the wealthy family or individual who commissioned the tomb, but never a royal title that matches our historical list of kings from Roman or Greek sources. This creates a jarring disconnect. We have the names of kings from external histories, and we have glorious tombs that look fit for kings, but the two cannot be convincingly joined. So where did they bury their rulers? One possibility is that the kings are indeed inside these facades, but in a manner that deliberately obscured their individual identities. Perhaps Nabataean royal tradition emphasized the office of kingship over the person. A king might be interred in a grand tomb, but the inscription would simply state it was built by the king for his dynasty, not as a personal memorial. His legacy was the kingdom itself, not a named monument. Another, more intriguing possibility is that the true royal burial sites were hidden. For a people so adept at concealment, with their hidden water channels and rumored tunnels, a secret, unmarked royal necropolis is not out of the question. It could lie in a sealed cave system, in a remote canyon, or even deep beneath one of the known monuments, accessed by a passage now buried under 2,000 years of silt. The tombs we call royal might instead be for the highest elite, the powerful merchant princes and generals who were the true pillars of the state, while the kings themselves sought a final seclusion, their graves known only to a trusted few whose knowledge died with them. This final physical puzzle is the ultimate symbol of Nabataean royalty, a presence that is everywhere implied in the grandeur of the city, yet remains personally elusive. We see their power etched across 100 cliffs, but we cannot find the hand that held the chisel. It is a fitting end to a journey through 25 unsolved puzzles. The Nabataeans built a civilization designed to awe and to function, but not necessarily to explain itself. They mastered the desert by hiding its water. They worshipped gods by leaving them faceless. They carved a city to proclaim their might, but left no chronicle of their deeds. Their story is written in engineering, in trade routes, and in the silent, beautiful language of stone. And perhaps that was always the intention, to be remembered not by their words, but by the impossible, enduring wonder they left behind. Their legacy is not a solved equation, but a constellation of brilliant questions. Each of these 25 puzzles, from the silent script to the hidden palace, from the faceless gods to the empty tombs, paints the portrait of a civilization that mastered its world through a unique blend of audacity and ambiguity. They were engineers who turned waterfalls into plumbing, traders who built an empire on scent and stone, and artists who carved a metropolis into a mountain range. Yet, with every monumental achievement, they seemed to pull a veil of mystery behind them. This was not an accident of history, but perhaps the very core of their identity. In a world of encroaching empires and competing ideologies, their greatest strength may have been their opacity, their ability to be indispensable without ever being fully known. The grander puzzle these pieces form is not just about the Nabataeans, but about us. It asks how any culture defines itself against the elements and against its neighbors. It shows that adaptation is not just about survival, but about choosing what to reveal and what to conceal, what to carve in eternal stone and what to trust only to the wind. The rose-red city, for all its explored corridors, remains a conversation in stone waiting for its final replies. The water channels still whisper of hidden maps, the blank eyes of the baetyls still hold a gaze we cannot meet, and the cliffs still guard secrets in their unexcavated depths. Which of these 25 riddles speaks most powerfully to you? Is it the fate of the last king, the purpose of the high place, or the silent language they chose not to write? Share your thoughts below and join us as we continue to seek the echoes of forgotten worlds.